I'm sorry, Erica, can I just interrupt a second? Because I think this part we want to have on the recording and the live
Sure.
stream. So let's give Jonathan a second to live stream.
Sure.
Yeah, we are live streaming now.
And we're recording already. Yep.
Okay. Erin is the director of the Immigrant Justice Clinic at the University of Wisconsin Law School. She teaches second and third year law students to represent individuals in removal proceedings and also to provide humanitarian-based immigration relief. Previously, Erin was founding member of Barbato Immigration Law and the executive director and staff attorney of the Community Immigration Law Center, or SILC. Prior to joining SILC, Erin managed a boutique immigration law firm's Madison office and was also a staff attorney with Catholic Charities Legal Services for Immigrants. Prior to attending law school, Erin volunteered as a teacher for a nonprofit organization in Quito, Ecuador, and worked with families and recently resettled refugee families living at or below the poverty line. The Wisconsin Law Journal recognized Erin in 2010 for her dedication to representing immigrants and her pro bono service, and awarded her again in 2014. In 2013, she received the Lee and Lynn Copin Family Justice Award for her work with immigrant victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. Currently, she's a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, the Wisconsin Bar Association, and serves on the board of SILC. I would like everybody to please join me in giving a warm welcome, even though she won't be able to hear it, to Erin Barbato. Thanks again, Erin, for joining us, and welcome. I'm going to turn it over to you now and mute myself.
Thank you so much for such a kind introduction and for such a warm welcome. I think at this time in many of our lives, we're looking for the sense of community and ability to share with each other. So I feel really grateful to be here, and for all of you showing up and spending your time and learning about something that's really dear to my heart and a true labor of love for me. I'm going to share my screen now, and I have some slides, and I think I'm going to talk for try to keep on the timeline for about 40 minutes or so. And then there'll be about 15 minutes for questions. So hopefully if you guys have questions, you will feel free to ask them. I hope you know that I'm a safe place. You can ask questions regardless of whether you think you should know the information or whether it's something that you're really looking to learn. So I hope this is a great environment for everybody to learn and from each other and from me, and join as a community as we talk about healing a lot of the harm that has gone on in the past 4 years and moving forward to a more humane and just immigration system. So I will share my screen now. All right. Okay. So I hope to talk today a little bit about from a Trump wall to a Biden bridge to citizenship. Just a brief overview of what I'll talk about today is the Immigrant Justice Clinic, just a little bit about what we do. And then I will compare a lot of the policies of the Trump administration with what Biden has already done through presidential proclamations as well as executive orders. And then talk about the US Citizenship Act of 2021, and then leave some time for questions. So the Immigrant Justice Clinic, where I work, we are housed at the University of Wisconsin Law School and the Economic Justice Institute. We work to provide services to people who are in deportation proceedings or seeking asylum and other forms of humanitarian relief to remain in the United States. And why do we do this? Well, we do this because in the United States, we do not have legal representation guaranteed to people who are facing deportation. So the Sixth Amendment guarantees representation if you're in criminal proceedings, but removal proceedings or deportation proceedings are considered civil in nature, and that a deportation is not a punishment. I highly disagree with that finding. A deportation will change a person's life in a way that with horrors and consequences that nobody should have to face. Representation matters in immigration. You are 5 times more likely to be successful in proceedings if you are non-detained, and 3 times more likely to be successful if you are detained. These are huge numbers. It may mean a difference in terms of whether you'll ever see your family again, or whether you'll ever have your job again, whether you'll ever return to the United States again. So the consequences are quite high. And these are the only proceedings, federal proceedings, where someone may be detained and facing the consequence of deportation without having a representation, where there is a government trained attorney on the other side. So this work is something that is incredibly important, a labor of love for so many. And hopefully in the future, this will be something that everybody will have the ability to have representation in these proceedings.
Where are you?
So we represent people who are in detention and living in Wisconsin, but also living outside of Wisconsin. So we represent people in asylum proceedings, people seeking refuge in the United States. And then we do a lot of representation of children, so special immigrant juvenile status, which is for a child who's been abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both of their parents. U-non-immigrant status is for survivors of serious crimes. T-non-immigrant status for survivors of human trafficking. Sadly, we do represent a number of families that were separated during the zero tolerance policy under the Trump administration. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And then additional defenses to deportation. We represent people at the Dodge County Detention Facility. Currently, this is the only facility in Wisconsin that has immigrant detention. Immigrants are detained here during the pendency of their deportation proceedings. It's about an hour drive from Madison, where I travel with my students pre-COVID to meet with anybody who would like information, legal information, and sometimes are able to provide representation. But most people in Dodge who are from Dane County are thankfully able to be represented by the attorneys at the Community Immigration Law Center, who are some of the best, brightest, and most passionate attorneys we know. So we do intakes there, and it allows us to ensure that more people are represented while they may face deportation. We also do experiential service learning trips. So I take students to the border to represent women and children who are detained at the Dilley Detention Center, as well as we've started to go to Tijuana to represent people who are seeking asylum in Tijuana. Hopefully, because of Biden, that will no longer be necessary. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But this is all based on the Wisconsin idea. So it's one of the longest and deepest traditions surrounding the University of Wisconsin, but it's to better the lives of people in Wisconsin and beyond our borders. So the Immigrant Justice Clinic really fits well within the Wisconsin idea, and allows us to serve people regardless of any borders that may block us from serving them. Okay, so let's get to kind of the heart of the talk right now. I'm going to try to compare some of the Trump administration's wall that they built through policy and proclamation with what I see as Biden administration's attempt to build a bridge or even a door. I had a hard time of figuring out which was the best word to use, and I think you could probably use both, but there may be doors opening and bridges being built. But if we take a look at the Trump administration, the impact of the Trump administration, there were over 400 changes in immigration law, mostly through executive orders, proclamations, regulations, and attorney general decisions. That did not involve Congress. So there were no changes officially in laws, but only through the power of the executive office, which we have all learned is very powerful from what we witnessed over the past 4 years. There was also a very intentional strategic plan of interlocking layers of restrictions that could survive legal challenges now. So a lot of what the Biden administration is doing is trying to dismantle a lot of the intricate work that the Trump administration did through their policies and proclamations. I have a list here of some of the, highlights, lowlights, whatever you want to call them, mostly very sad lowlights of what was done. And I'll go into them in a little bit more detail. But we looked at the executive order, the travel ban. We witnessed the Safe Third Country transit ban, which barred almost everybody at our southern border from qualifying for asylum. A new public charge rule, increased ICE enforcement, which we witnessed in Wisconsin and Dane County, migrant protection protocols, which I'll talk about a little bit more, but a decrease in the approvals of immigrant and non-immigrant visas, employment-based, family-based, diversity, all across the board, as well as the attempted rescission of Daca, and then the termination of TPS from other countries. And I just want to say these are broad strokes. There's so many more, 400 to 1,000 policy changes that occurred, but these are kind of the ones that I think were mostly in the public knowledge. So first I want to just take a quick look at the Executive Order 13769, which was titled Protecting the Nation from Foreign Terrorist Entry into the United States. Okay, so they barred people from Muslim majority countries and some African countries on purpose. And thankfully, as you can see on the right here, the number of people that were able to enter the United States from these countries decreased substantially from 2016 to 2019. The ban worked in their terms of what their goal was to bar people from coming. They did. But what did Biden do on his first day of office? He issued a proclamation on ending discriminatory bans on the entry to the United States. So this stopped that, the Muslim ban, as many people call it, and called it out as the United States was built on a foundation of religious freedom and tolerance. So call it out and for what it was, and recognize that it barred people from Muslim majority countries and largely African countries, and it's gone now. So people from those countries who've been separated from their families for unjust reasons will hopefully be able to reunite soon in the United States if that's where they choose to do so. If anybody wants to learn more, I did include a few, some information about podcasts and books that I think offer additional information, because I don't have a ton of time to go into the details here, but this is one of them, a Code Switch podcast that you may want to look at that regarding the Muslim ban or the proclamation. And I will share these slides so you guys don't have to like busily write anything down. Okay, so let's move on to some of Trump's policies that basically ended asylum. Asylum was in our laws after World War II in a response to the world's failure to protect people who were fleeing Nazi Germany and Europe. United States turned people away. The story, I'm sure, is very familiar to so many of you. We tried to be better. That was the goal, us and the world. And then in 1980, we codified these laws that allow people, non-refoulement was it. We were not going to send people back to a place where they will be persecuted or tortured. The past 4 years, the Trump administration did everything possible to end that protection for people, including a process called metering. So people had to, when they arrived at the southern border, prior to that, you could present yourself to a CBP officer, Customs Border Protection Officer, and ask for asylum. And then you'd be processed through our laws. Asylum is legal. It's in our laws. It's very clear that it is legal, but very much a lot of confusion over the past 4 years because of the rhetoric that was coming out of that administration. One of the most effective policies was the migrant protection protocols. So metering caused people to wait in a border town for 6 to 9 months in order to actually process for asylum. Then migrant protection protocols came in and they would wait those 6 and 9 months to be metered and then see an immigration judge and be sent back to Mexico to wait in towns where it wasn't very safe for migrants. They became targets of violence, of extortion, of kidnapping. And then also the Safe Third Country transit ban, which barred people from receiving asylum in the United States if you passed through a third country on your way to the southern border, and if you didn't apply for asylum in a third country, regardless of whether the countries have an asylum system, regardless of whether the same persecutors are in that country. This was very tactical. It worked. It barred almost everybody who arrived at the southern border, unless you're from Mexico, from being eligible to apply for asylum. And then there was also an elimination of domestic violence and gang violence as a ground for applying for asylum. Not on a 100% basis, but that was the intention. And Biden came in to rebuild the asylum from the rubble. There is so much work to be done in this area. The Trump administration dismantled asylum. They left 20,000 people seeking asylum, living in Mexico with no idea of where to go. But as of last week, on the first day of his administration, Biden announced the executive order on creating a comprehensive regional framework to address the causes of migration, to manage migration throughout North and Central America, and to provide safe and orderly processing for asylum seekers at the United States border. On Friday, the first people that were placed on MPP, the Migrant Protection Protocols, processed into the United States, where they will be able to apply for asylum within our borders and not forced to remain in Mexico during that process. This is just an information sheet that they're handing out at the border so people know what to do. At this point, the asylum process is still at a halt due to the pandemic. And hopefully that will be resolved soon. People are in need of this protection, and they deserve this protection under our laws. This is one podcast that I think is incredibly powerful to talk about the consequences of Migrant Protection Protocol. It's called The Outcrowd, and it's American Life podcast. Okay, so what about refugees? So asylum is the process where people can come to the United States and apply affirmatively or defensively, if they're in deportation proceedings, to seek refuge in the United States. So they might be at our southern border, they might be applying at a port of entry in the United States, or even at like an airport, or they might be in the United States on an immigrant visa and non-immigrant visa, and something changes in their home country and they realize they can't go home. But refugees are people that are found to be persecuted because of their race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. And the United Nations, outside of the United States, determines whether an individual qualifies for this. The United States has historically been accepted the most number of refugees than any other country in the world. But that changed over the past 4 years. In the last year under Obama, we admitted about 85,000 people. And then it's systematically went down until last year, when the cap was set at 18,000, but we only admitted about 11,000 refugees. Historic lows. And you can see in the graph on the right, the red line says what the executive, the president, has the power to determine how many refugees we will admit every year. And it doesn't always meet that number, but as you can see, the past 4 years, it's been pretty dramatic in terms of what those numbers have become. So now Biden comes in and he's changing this again. So he, in the fiscal year of 2021, which will start in October, will admit 125,000 refugees. It's a much larger number. It's a need for a change, but it's also, we need to recognize that there are over 26 million refugees worldwide, and the United States probably could even do more. But another thing that all of you are probably aware of, or if not aware of, something to be cognizant of, is because of the historic lows over the past 4 years, a number of the agencies providing services to refugees who have arrived, those agencies have closed. So there's going to have to be a transition period in terms of providing, ramping up those organizations, and also to have community support for our new arrivals who've been waiting outside of the United States for so very long. No one can forget the zero tolerance policy and family separation. So we know that this was a tactical, deliberate action by the Trump administration under Jeff Sessions. He was quoted saying, "We need to take away children, no matter how young, because they wanted to deter people from coming to the United States." this was horrific. The public did speak up about it and it was ended, but to this day, there are families that still remain separated. Let's see. Okay, so family reunification. On the first day in office, or actually, not actually the first day of office, but 2 weeks later, Biden announced an executive order on establishing an interagency task force on the reunification of families. And so that has 180 days, I think it's 180, it might be 120, oops, don't quote me on that, to come up with a plan to reunite all of the families and also provide additional support for the families that were separated and then reunited. And it has some of the brilliant, committed people that are on this committee. But it's a long time to wait 180 days if you're separated from your family. And some of these families may never be reunited again because of the way that they were separated. Really good book called Separated by Jacob Soboroff. That's a really deep dive into some of the issues that happen. And then a podcast where he's on that called In the Thick with Maria Hinojosa. It's called Unthinkable Trauma, if you want to follow up on that. I think these are great resources. Okay, so let's go to the attempted termination of Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or Daca. Jeff Sessions, again, who we talked about in the last slide, he stated the program known as Daca was effectuated under the Obama administration is being rescinded. 4 years of a fight and it wasn't rescinded. That being said, the work isn't done. People with Daca don't have a pathway to citizenship yet, but they may soon. And I'll talk about that when I talk about the Citizenship Act of 2021. Okay, so Biden came in first day and announced they're preserving and fortifying deferred action for childhood arrivals. There are 6,500 people currently with Daca in Wisconsin, but there are 11,000 people newly eligible. So those people will be needing resources and legal services and help through the process, except so many of them are able to process on their own, but it's a large number of people that would benefit from Daca being reinstated. But we do need a permanent solution. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit too. One thing we saw in our communities, and even in Wisconsin, we saw the Trump administration, their ICE enforcement priorities. They were to deport anybody, regardless of who you are. If you're here undocumented, you are an enforcement priority. We saw ICE have really intense strategic actions in Madison that terrified our communities and put many people into deportation proceedings that normally wouldn't be a priority. One thing that is interesting, the removals of undocumented immigrants rose 17% from 2017 to 2018, but remained low when compared to even the Obama administration. But I think that has a lot to do with some of the actions on the southern border and how we denied so many people even entry into the United States. But apprehensions at the border did increase quite a bit. Now under Biden came out with a new memo on ICE priorities this past week, and it highlights that priorities will be people that for national security, also border security or public safety. So looking at people with very serious criminal convictions. It also offers ICE officers, it signifies that there'll be fewer deportations and strict oversight. So what does that mean? Strict oversight from their supervisors, from the people above, the people that Biden has asked to join ICE. And so that may, they have more discretion in who to deport, who to initiate proceedings from, and hopefully that will mean less people will be deported. Under the Trump administration, there was a huge increase in civil detention. So civil detention means immigrant detention. So people who are detained, not for criminal reasons, but for immigration reasons. they're not there because they're charged with a crime. They're there because they're in the process of being deported or applying for relief. So the US has the largest immigrant detention system. In 2019, we detained on average 50,000 people a day in these immigrant detention centers, many of them being private. You can see on the map here, those red map spots, those are private detention centers run by billion-dollar corporations, CoreCivic and Geo Group. They make money off of detaining people. And our government, under the Trump administration, gave them tons of money, our taxpayer dollars, to do this, to detain people who were simply processing for relief under our laws. We saw abuses in detention, really horrific abuses. The highest level death toll in ICE custody has been the highest it's been in 15 years, which does have something to do with the pandemic, but in the same way, ICE had the ability to release everybody, almost everybody in detention on their discretion, but even during a pandemic, they did not do so. We saw COVID with our, at Dodge County Correctional Facility. There have been 4 confirmed cases, there may be more. I have had clients who've contracted COVID even in detention, even though they've had US citizen family members ready and willing to house them outside of detention. ICE just refused to release them. And then we also saw the horrors at the Irwin County Detention Center, where forced hysterectomies and other gynecological exams. Really just highlighting that there's no oversight and really no respect of human dignity in these detention centers. Biden attempted to have a 100-day moratorium on deportations. The Texas Attorney General, though, came in and said, I'm going to fight you on this. And it really was based on this intricate memo and MOU that they put together, Trump put together with the ICE union, tactical, deliberate, all very much under who I think is brilliant in a really dangerous way, is Stephen Miller. And if you want to learn more about him, it's a tough book to read, but really important, by Jean Guerrero, who is an incredible journalist, but it's called Hate Monger, and just how intentional he was with what he wanted to do to our immigration system. We still have family detention centers as well as just regular detention centers, but those numbers have gone down quite a bit in recent times due to COVID, as well as Biden releasing a number of people. But we still have family detention centers that these are very low numbers as well. So the Texas Family Residential Center houses about 400 people, Berks and Carnes less, but there's still children detention centers. So these things they have not gone away under Biden by any means. They've detained less people, but it's not over. 2 things that you may be interested in listening to is the Homeland Insecurity podcast by Raices. It talks about the history of CBP, Custom Border Protection, and then Immigration Nation, which is on Netflix. Prepare yourselves to watch it, but I think it's really important to see how bold ICE officers are and how they felt emboldened to really deport people regardless of the reason. Another thing to briefly mention before I move on to the Citizenship Act of 2021 is the census. So we saw through the past 4 years that the Trump administration attempted to discredit and not count people who are undocumented as people under the census. Studies have shown that this was a 40-year bid by restrictionist groups to exclude human beings in the United States from the census. On Biden's first day in office, he ended this with an executive order on ensuring a lawful and accurate enumeration and apportionment pursuant to the decennial census. Those are a lot of complicated words in one proclamation, but I think people should be counted. And I think that's what will be done, even though there has been a lot of fear instilled in people disclosing that information on a census. All right, so let's move on. Okay, I know I'm going fast, but I don't want to take up too much time because I know everyone wants to talk. So Biden administration on, let's talk a little bit about the Citizenship Act of 2021. These are some broad strokes of what the Citizenship Act is attempting to do. So pathway to citizenship for undocumented workers, family reunification, increased employment-based visas and green cards, worker protection, employment verification, fixing the asylum system. There is some border security and screening enhancement, and then also addressing root causes of migration. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But what I want to address real quickly is we always hear, or maybe I always hear, why don't people just get in line? And I'm so tired of hearing that. It's exhausting. It's just, people need to know that there are no lines for most people to get into. There's no line. You can't wait. A lot of people just don't have the option of waiting. So what is your option? There isn't an option. And so this is what I think the Citizenship Act of 2021 is attempting to correct. The people that no longer have a line to wait in, they will have a process of becoming a legal part of their communities and being to be citizens and fully participate in our society. There are only 3 ways that you can really become a US citizen. One is by land. So you're born in the United States. Birthright citizenship. We've actually seen that be attacked quite a bit over the past 4 years as well. But if you were born in the United States, regardless of the status of your parents, you are a US citizen. That is what the Constitution promises. By blood, if you're born abroad, but you're born abroad to both US citizen parents or one US citizen parent, you may be a US citizen. And then by act of law, naturalization. But in order to naturalize, you have to be in one of those lines. And those lines there are really only 4 lines to get into. One is family-based. So if one of your family members is eligible to apply for you, you may be able to get in those lines that will eventually lead to citizenship. But some of those lines right now are 20 years at times. Employment-based, very difficult, only 140,000 visas a year. Humanitarian based, those numbers vary, but that may be asylum, that might be U visa, that might be a T visa, some ways to do it, but you have to have suffered quite a horrific amount in order to qualify. So that's what our law asks. Either you have a family member, a company wants to apply for you, or you've suffered some atrocity. And then there is the diversity lottery visa. So you can actually apply for a lottery if you're from an underrepresented country. There are 50,000 visas a year for that. And Biden is attempting to expand that as well, and I'll talk about it. But if you don't fit into these categories, which are pathways to citizenship, there's no line for you. And for so many people, either they don't have the family relationship or the education or the experience, or they haven't suffered enough. They can't qualify. There's a lot of bars to qualifying, including, possibly entering the United States without inspection. A lot of really high bars to obtaining any sort of lawful permanent resident status in the United States. That is a pathway to citizenship. So President Biden sends an immigration bill to Congress as part of his commitment to modernize our immigration system. And let's look at it a little bit. So the bill announces an 8-year pathway to citizenship for about 11 million people who are in the United States, undocumented, without status. The requirements, file within the United States. So you're in the United States. You've been continuously physically present since January of this year, January 1. Some things that are important: the public charge is not an inadmissibility ground, so you don't have to show that you have tons of assets. Families can apply together, and it can't be used as a form of enforcement. The benefits: it allows someone to process for 6 years with an extension with a pathway to citizenship, employment authorization document while you're in the status, and ability to travel internationally. And then lawful permanent residency after 5 years, and then after 3 years, you can apply for your citizenship. So this would open up a line with not a long waiting list for 11 million people who've been waiting for a long time to process in the United States. There is an expedited pathway to citizenship of 3 years for people with Daca or Dreamers, kind of a different group. People came when they were young. For people with temporary protected status who've been here for a long time, and then also farm workers. And those are people that have worked in the United States as farm workers for a long time. They can process in an expedited manner. And then the Citizenship Act also talks about addressing the root causes for irregular migration. So what does that mean? So when I talked about those lines you can get in, that's like regular migration, but irregular migration is due often for people who, you talk about the push and pull factors, and push factors may be violence in your home country, war, environmental disaster, gang violence, groups that are controlling your government and persecuting people. So a lot of times we talk about that from the Northern Triangle of Central America. And so there's a picture of La Bestia, which is a train that travels through Mexico that a lot of people take on their way to the United States to seek asylum or to enter the United States. And then there's also a lot of people who come to our southern border who are traveling from countries outside of Central and South America, but they make a very dangerous journey because they often have no other choice because of the push factors from their home countries. But Biden talks about creating a refugee processing centers in Central America that Obama did have. They were very new and weren't fully functioning by the time that Trump became president, and then they were closed, of course. And then also funding to help end gang control and domestic violence in the Northern Triangle. But it will provide resources to help provide ways to make people more safe and to possibly be able to process for asylum or refugee status without making a dangerous journey, without knowing whether you will be admitted. Next, oops. So one thing that I think is really commendable about this act is a lot of times when we see things presented with immigration to Congress, it's going to harm somebody. Someone has to suffer in order for others to obtain a pathway to citizenship. That's not really what this is doing. There is some information, there is some increased technology on the border to combat drug trafficking, because drug trafficking, most of it happens at ports of entry. And so that's what the Biden administration is trying to do, not building a wall to keep people out. That doesn't work and is nonsensical, but using technology to increase the safety of people in this industry. So to stop drug trafficking from happening with actually technology and science. But it doesn't say we're going to deport this many people so that these 11 million people can obtain lawful permanent resident status, which a lot of the previous bills had done. Then these are just a few highlights that I get excited about that may be super boring to all of you, but they are some really interesting inclusions for the Citizenship Act of 2021 that could cure some of the policies that punish the most people or make people wait in lines that are way too long. So an increase in caps for family and employment-based green cards, so they would decrease those lines for the people that are actually in the line. Establish a dual intent international student visa with regards to immigration. So students coming to the United States can also say, like, maybe I want to stay here one day. They don't have to say, like, I'm never going to stay, I'm just going to study. It prevents states from charging non-resident tuition to refugees, asylum seekers, and other special categories for non-citizens. So that would be huge for people in Wisconsin, especially for people with Daca who have to pay out-of-state tuition. And an H-4 visa reform, which would possibly help agriculture in Wisconsin and create possibly a visa for people working on dairy farms, which isn't available right now. An increase in the diversity visa from 55,000, which is really 50,000 because of something called NACARA, to 80,000 per year. And then an increase in per country percentage from 7% to 20%. So those long lines that I was talking about, that it might take someone who's a US citizen and wants to apply for his brother from Mexico, it could take 15 to 18 years. I can't remember exactly what it is, but it would shorten those lines by increasing that percentage to 20%. Eliminate a 1-year filing deadline for asylum, and then eliminate this 3-year inadmissibility bar for people who've been in the United States for more than a year or without authorization, which keeps a number of families separated. It's a really powerful bar. And then crimmigration conviction would be redefined in a lot of intricate ways that I think might bore you, but are really important to me and to people we serve. And then an increase in U visas from 10,000 to 50,000. These are for survivors of serious crimes. And right now they have to wait about 10 years to just get their U visa. So this would increase or decrease the waiting line by quite a bit. And then another thing that I think is really important to mention, and because words matter and how we talk about people matters and what terms we use really matter. And they matter so much right now as we are looking to form a more humane immigration system. Biden is seeking to replace the word alien with a less dehumanizing term of non-citizen or foreign national throughout the system and throughout the laws. Because right now it says alien almost everywhere. Whereas Ken Cuccinelli, who is formerly in charge of the agencies, he had tried to go in and change non-foreign national to alien. So it's just like a total change in direction. So I'm going to wrap up because I realize I'm almost over time already, but what can be done? So government needs to hear from the general population. They need to know that you care and why you care about this. One thing that I think about a lot is how our immigration policies cause family separation. People spoke out, the American public spoke out when we tore children away from their parents. But we do this on a daily basis through ICE enforcement on the interior as well. Everybody who stood up and protested against the family separation needs to have a voice in this as well, because it really is on a level the same thing. And so if we get that momentum, and I bet most of you are out protesting against the family separation. And I think if you look at the details, you would feel just as enraged about so many of the current the previous policies, but even what's going on right now. And if we get that movement and everybody hears from you, there may be hope for the Citizenship Act of 2021 to pass. But it's going to be difficult because it's an act of law and Congress needs to pass it. And as we all know, the numbers are really, really close. So immigration is an act of courage for people. So many of the push factors give people no choice. I don't want to hear people saying, get in line. I don't want to hear people say, why do people cross the border illegally and seek asylum? You can do that. That is our laws. They're a reason why our protections exist for people to seek asylum. They have no choice. And we don't want to be the country turning people away anymore to face persecution. It's been enough. We need to act. And the truth needs to be told. And so I think if we lead with facts, if we lead with our heart, I think there is a lot of hope in all of this, but a lot of healing to do as well. These are just a bunch of books that I have recently read or have been or are on my bookshelf right now that I think some of you may be interested in. Just as an aside, A Land of Permanent Goodbyes is a YA novel, a young adult, but it's still a very good read and really interesting. So, and some of you have probably read a bunch of these already, but if you want to learn more, these are some I would start with. And then a few podcasts that I would recommend as well. And I said I will share these slides, and you guys can use these as you find interesting or helpful. And then, oh, I had a beautiful picture of a butterfly on there, but it's gone. But anyway, thank you so much. That's all I have for slides and information. I know that was a ton, so I hopefully I can answer some questions, and then you guys can also debrief together. But thank you for listening. I know it was a lot and I went really fast, but I want to like force people to understand it in a way, and I hope I wasn't too forceful.
Erin, thank you so much. It was incredible information, amazingly presented, really, really compelling and engaging and informative. And I think the question that came up repeatedly, just to remind people, if you haven't checked the chat, that it will be recorded and available on the Dane Sanctuary Coalition Facebook and also the TBE Facebook. The PowerPoint slides Erin has graciously made available to us, but I don't quite yet know where those will be. Does somebody have an answer to that, or we can let people know?
Well, I'll get them from Erin, and so I will find a way to share it on the Dane Sanctuary Facebook page and or Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice's website. It will definitely be shared. And I'll put my email in the chat so people can also just email me and ask me to send them the link to the slides.
Terrific. Before we move to breakout groups, there were a few questions that I saw in the chat that I'm going to pose to you, Erin, and then we can see if there are others that people would like to put in the chat now. We'll take another 10, 15 minutes top for Q&A. One question that came up is can it be explained why thousands of people, including asylum seekers, have been deported during the Biden administration?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I mentioned in the slides that Biden attempted a 100-day moratorium on detention in order to review policies and to retrain ICE officers to really get the new priorities in line. But the Trump administration knew that that was going to happen, so they prepared to fight that. And they had put some policies and memorandum in place that allowed a federal judge in Texas, who was a Trump appointee, to not allow the 100-day moratorium to continue. So some of it is not under his control right now. And that's just the reality of the situation. And, I sit here today with a client who may be deported at any minute. And it's terrifying because I think if he was allowed to have the 100-day moratorium, we would learn that this man shouldn't be deported, that it really was based on Trump's policies and things like that. And those are thousands of people who are sitting there, thousands of people that may be deported back to their home country to suffer, to be persecuted, or families to be separated. So it's really difficult, and I wish it would stop. I don't think deportations are ever going to stop 100%, but I think there will hopefully be movement towards a more humane process.
Great, thanks very much. Several people, including myself, had the question of who is it most important to be advocating to at this point? Congress, Biden administration, specific people in Congress? What would you suggest?
It's a really good question. And I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that. But Congress needs to know that we support it. So our Congress people in Wisconsin absolutely need to know. But I think it's also really important. Some of the questions I get just from people in the public or people I run into at like a doctor's fight, pre-COVID, whatever, just people, the public, it would be like, well, why are people breaking the law and seeking asylum? Or why don't people just get in line? I think one thing is really informing our friends, acquaintances that maybe don't understand the policies and what they do to families and how impossible they are. So it's part of it is information and really getting the truth out there. We heard so many false statements during the Trump administration about who is entering the United States. So some people are truly fearful. They say this caravan is coming with terrorists from the middle. I mean, total ridiculous information that's just not true. And so we need to start leading with the truth and also humanizing people. And I said, Biden is attempting to take the word alien out of the laws. It's important. It's easy to dehumanize people with terms that are not true. So even when someone is talking about, you'll hear ICE officers say, oh, your detainee client is going to be deported. And like, this is a human being that you've detained. His name is this, and he is in ICE detention. He's not a detainee. So I really, I think it's important to change the conversation and ensure that everybody knows that these policies are affecting human beings. And that's, I hope that's enough. I don't know if it's enough, but I do think that everyone that came out and protested against family separation, the zero tolerance policy, needs to be speaking and advocating at this time.
Great, thank you for that information and that encouragement, because one of the things we'll be talking about in the breakout rooms is where and how do we advocate, where do we get education, which you've given us so much information about, and where could we donate? So those are things people could be keeping in mind. There's another question in the chat about who gets to decide who has, quote, suffered enough to qualify for humanitarian path to citizenship.
It's a really good question. And I think, when I talk about humanitarian pathways to citizenship, I think about refugees and asylees, which is really the same definition. It's just different of where they're processed. Refugees are outside of the United States, processed by the UN. And then asylum seekers are within the United States, applying in front of a judge or an asylum officer. But there are also other basis for asylum. We talked about special immigrant juvenile status for children, and also certain protections for survivors of international human trafficking, as well as survivors of serious crimes who helped in the investigation and prosecution of that crime in the United States. But the standard of how much you've suffered is generally based in the law and the statute. And we use that or the federal regulations in terms of like what the definition is. And so we rely a lot on one thing that I mentioned, if any of you are social workers or professionals that can offer like expert opinions, oftentimes that's what we're relying on, because I can go to court and say, my client has suffered enough, I see their scars, but they really don't want to hear from me. They want a doctor signing off on that, someone with a specialized degree. So it's often just putting together enough evidence to demonstrate that the harm rises to the level that's either defined by the immigration law or by case law as well.
Thank you very much. I want to make sure that we get to move on to our breakout rooms. And before we do, I think we've covered the questions that were asked in the chat and gotten some just wonderful answers to them there. And thank you so much. Rabbi Bonnie put something in the chat that she wanted to let us all know about a couple of important upcoming events before we break out into our groups. Bonnie, you want to take it away?
Yeah, thank you, Erica. And thank you, Erin. This has been amazing. And believe me, we were not bored, not even a little bit. So the Dane Sanctuary Coalition has a couple of events coming up. And also I have a request for you all. So February 28th, a week from tonight at 7 p.m., Christ Presbyterian Church and Silk and the Dane Sanctuary Coalition are co-hosting Words of Worth. So I'm going to, what Erin did in 50 minutes tonight, I'm going to do a really quick march in 15 minutes next week. And then we're going to have an opportunity together to write letters to people who are in detention. It's really a great morale booster for people to know that they are not alone, they haven't been forgotten, and that people know and care about them. So please join us next week. I put in the chat the link to register for that event, and you can also find it on the Dane Sanctuary Coalition Facebook page and Christ Presbyterian Church's Facebook page. Dane Sanctuary Coalition is having a coalition-wide meeting This is open to all Dane Sanctuary Coalition member congregations and organizations. So if you are a member of a Dane Sanctuary Coalition congregation or organization, you are invited and encouraged to attend. It will be on April 12th at 7 p.m. And it will be a chance for people to network and to share what's going on in your congregation and give everybody a chance to share ideas and find ways to collaborate and partner and work together and support each other's work and to do things collaboratively as a coalition. So there will be more information coming out soon with an agenda and links to join that meeting. And I also want to let you all know, and Bianca Tomasini put in the chat, thank you, Bianca, so much. We are reviving, I guess you'd say, our advocacy committee and our communications committee. These are two incredibly vital committees. And as you've heard from Erin, advocacy is so important right now. Just because we have a friendly face in the White House does not mean our job is done. If anything, it means we have real work to do. And so advocacy and communications are so important. If you are interested in joining either of those committees, Bianca put her email in the chat. And Bianca, if you could put it in one more time for everybody. And my email was in the chat and I'll put it in there again as well. Please let us know if you're interested. Reaching out to ask me a question about it does not commit you to anything. So if you want to ask and find out more, please do email me or Bianca. And so that's what, thank you, Bianca. That was my commercial interruption for the night. Thank you, Erica.
Thank you, Bonnie. You know, I'm thinking that so that we have adequate time in the breakout rooms, that I think we'll just separate now, and everybody in Temple Bethel will be in one, and then the other three will be facilitated by Bonnie and by Ruth and Leslie, and we won't come back to the whole group. So we really have a few more minutes to really decide what our next steps are going to be. So thank you everybody for coming, and Erin especially for just a stellar, incredible presentation. And hopefully we'll see you soon, because we'll also be wanting to get together for a planning meeting to pull all this together and see where we go next. Whether we do that in several groups or one is to be determined, but we'll get back to everybody about that. Any other last comments from organizers before we separate to our groups?
Yeah, Erica, I have everybody set up for 3 DSC groups and 1 TBE group. If by any chance you're in the wrong group, just stay in the main room or come back to the main room and we'll figure it out. Sound okay?
And we'll meet till 8:30. And
Yeah.
there's, we need a note taker for every group. We've got one for TBE. Let's make sure the other groups have a note taker also. Okay. Thank you, everybody. See you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Here
Thanks.
we go.
Thank you.
Erin, whoops, I guess she's gone.
I think she left.